I realize I have never done a detailed due diligence series in all the episodes I've done. So let me remedy that. In the on-demand boot camp, we have an entire phase of the 4-phase strategy devoted to due diligence. So in these next upcoming episodes, I'll touch on what gets covered in that phase to support you as you get in or grow your self-storage business. My name is Mark Helm. I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Quick Start Academy, where the training I have for small investors getting in the self-storage business is all housed, including the new on-demand self-storage bootcamp I offer. And what I do is I support small investors who want to get in the self-storage business or who want to grow their self-storage business strategically, do so in a way that creates true wealth and a fulfilling career. And I want to take the next few episodes and go deep into the due diligence process. You know, every deal's different. New construction, buying raw land and building, is a very different due diligence process than buying an existing facility. An expansion has a different due diligence process than a conversion does. For these episodes, we're going to assume that you're buying an existing self-storage facility. And in one of them, in this series, I will talk about expansions, conversions, and touch on new construction. But I'm going to primarily go through the due diligence process of buying an existing self-storage facility. Now, my overall relationship to the due diligence process is this. I made a lot of assumptions as I looked at a project and analyzed a project. You know, in our business strategy, we talk about the minimum requirements that each of us, and it's different for all of us, but we all have minimum requirements that a deal must hit. So as I did my analysis, in my preliminary analysis, it obviously hit or exceeded those minimum benchmark numbers I have. My relationship to this time period is I'm replacing all of my assumptions with real data and real knowledge and real numbers. Then, when I have everything I'm going to get, I step back and I look at what I have, and does it still work for our business plan and business strategy? If it does, we close. If it doesn't, we either try to make it so with the seller or we walk away. Now, for me, one of the most challenging times of the whole process is we've gone through all the due diligence, the deal still looks good, and now it's time to remove the contingencies and close on the deal. That's when I'm the most scared. Now, we talked about how to deal with that in other episodes, so we're not going to dwell on that here, but just know that for me, that's usually the scariest time of any transaction, is when I'm removing my contingencies. Now, given how hot the self-storage market is today, if you're buying an existing facility, I'm going to assume that you've got 30 to 45 days on your due diligence period. So for these episodes, that's the assumption. Very often, if I need more time, we've built it into our contract, but I usually have to pay for it. In other words, my deposit or a portion of my deposit becomes non-refundable if I don't. And I can remove most of my contingencies within 30 to 45 days if I'm moving straight forward and if the seller's cooperated, which mostly they do. I can usually remove most of my contingencies, sometimes my financing contingency or some of my third-party reports like appraisals, etc., which are outside the scope of my control. I'll know whether my odds are good of me getting the loan at that point or the appraisal coming in. So very often, if I need to buy more time, I will put money at risk. I'm not saying you should, I'm just saying that's what we do. But usually today, we've got 30 to 45 day due diligence period if we're buying an existing facility. If we're buying raw land or we're buying a building that we're converting, very often we have much more time. Today, what I'd like to cover are timelines and what to get from the seller so you can do a good due diligence. So, timelines. Every deal's different, but there's usually, if you're buying an existing facility, you're moving through the same spaces. Some of the details might be a little different, but there's very same spaces that you go through time and time again. Many of you already have it. I've been offering it for years. It's included in our boot camp, but there is what we call buyer's checklist, which are basically kind of a due diligence checklist, pretty basic due diligence checklist. But if you don't have it, there's a link below where you can get it. And what we do today is I take that checklist and I actually create an Excel sheet from that today. Many times I've just used that list, but I've created an Excel spreadsheet and adjusted it, slightly different because each deal's a little different. And I will put on that timeline by when an event needs to occur, who's responsible for it, and who's going to be doing it. So the basic spaces that this checklist covers, or that you need to get covered in a due diligence time period, are physical inspection of the property. Just the physical inspection of the buildings themselves. Or if you're buying raw land or you're doing an expansion, geotech reports where they core drill and does there have to be any land work involved in getting the site compacted enough to support, storage buildings on it. Feasibility reports. If you're adding more space, always get a feasibility report. We make every contract contingent on a feasibility report. Third-party reports, like environmental. If you've got to get a new environmental or updated environmental the seller's giving you, that needs to be done. Surveys need to be done. If the original inspection comes back with anything like drainage issues or structural issues or HVAC issues, you'll have to get specialized people in there to look at the projects and give you a report on them. Survey, topographical survey if you're doing construction on raw land. Title reports, financing. Big space to move through. We're not going to cover it in this due diligence series because I've covered it in detail in others. And there is, if you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be a link with some of the episodes covering financing. If you're reading this at Creating Wealth Through Self Storage, in the text there are links to videos on financing. I've covered it before, so I don't want to cover it here, but it's a major component of the due diligence process, obviously. The financial records and seeing how they run the business and comparing what their actual numbers are compared to what the marketing package is and what's in our preliminary analysis. All that is a space that has to be moved through. We'll cover in detail here. And a strategy for your takeover. What are you going to do when you take over this facility? What's your first 30, 60, 90-day strategy? For us, all those are the spaces we move through during the due diligence time period. Now, given the shortness of the time period, obviously we're moving through we don't do them in order. We're going, at any given moment, we could be in any different location on what needs to happen during the due diligence period. So we set out a timeline and who's going to handle what item. Now, I know for many of us, we handle it all. And there were times where it was just me. Now I'm at the point where we have team members, and certain team members do certain parts of it. And who are the third-party vendors? Usually we have those lined out between the letter of intent and the execution of the contract. So when the contract gets signed, we execute the engagement letters with the third-party vendors and we turn them loose. So the very first and one of the most important things, because how well you do your timeline and making sure that everything gets covered, that will set the stage for the effectiveness of your due diligence process. Now I want to cover in this episode also what to get from the seller. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I invite you to go to episode 289 at creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com, because it's written out for you and you can copy and paste it if you want. For us now, what I'm going to share with you is in our contracts. Now, it wasn't always in our contracts. Very often I would write a letter to the seller upon the acceptance of a contract, but at this stage, we make sure it's in the contract. In a perfect contract, our due diligence time period would not start until we get these items. That's not always the case for us. Sometimes the sellers, for whatever reason, their attorney won't allow that, and I'm not going to lose a deal over that. Also, if property is listed, in most cases, the brokers today are very good, and they already have all that due diligence stuff in a virtual box somewhere, and the moment the contract's signed, we get a link to it, or within 5 days or whatever the contract says. So it's rare I'm chasing sellers for a lot of this stuff. It happens, but it's becoming more and more rare these days. But here is what we want to get from the seller. Copy of insurance policies, a survey, title policy from the last loan, an environmental phase 1 study, a current rent roll that we will update before closing, copies of the last 3 years federal and state tax returns, copies of tax bills, topo surveys, bank statements for the last 3 years, utility bills, profit and loss statements for the previous 2 calendar years, balance sheets for the previous 2 calendar years, management summary report for the end of each of the previous 2 years, and a monthly profit and loss statement for the current year we're in, monthly balance sheets for the current years, and monthly management summary reports for the current year. I want a current accounts receivable list from their operating system, what tenants owe what and for how long. The ability to get reports periodically from their operating system as we may need them based on what we discover from the above. Architectural drawings or building plans, and capital expenses that they've completed, details of anything they've done in the last 3 years or are currently doing or are planned. Now, we don't usually get all of that. We'll get what they have. Sellers don't always have building plans. Sellers don't always have title. Some sellers don't even have environmental, although that's rare. But we get what we can, and then we go from there. Now, in the upcoming episodes, we'll discuss what we do with all of that. But when the due diligence process starts, like day 1, this is where at least I put my effort and energy, is on an effective timeline and making sure that we are getting or are receiving from the seller the following items. Also, like a pro tip, I've got all of my engagement letters so far with third-party vendors there. I execute them, and I've ordered the feasibility report. I've ordered a survey if I need a survey. I've ordered my inspection, and I do all of that day 1 because I've got that lined up as soon as I'm pretty clear we're going to be in a deal. Usually our contract negotiations take a week or 2, so I have plenty of time to start lining stuff up and ready to go in the event we sign the contract. So I look forward to really diving deeper into the due diligence process than we've done in the past in these episodes with you, because it's such a critical piece, especially today with the short time periods we have if you're buying an existing storage facility. I look forward to being with you next week as we go over the physical inspection and third-party vendor part of the due diligence process. I'll see you then.